present a referral. The client is a self-referred male who would like to get his life back on track. He has been off his medications and out of therapy for over a year. The assessment instruments that were used were the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality 2, MMPI-2, MM1, Clinical Multi-Axial Inventory, number 4. Also, the Fulstein MMSE and a biopsychosocial assessment was completed. It is important to note that due to agency policies, the assessment had to be completed on a volunteer basis, and the same client was not used as was the assessment and the treatment procedures. The mother was present for the assessment, and she participated in the interview process. The presenting problem: the client presents with a lack of motivation, difficulty concentrating at work, and a complete withdrawal from all social activities. He's been experiencing suicidal thoughts, difficulty sleeping, some weight loss, which he attributes to being off his previous medications, that he reports feeling isolated from church and his church family. He reports that this is added to feelings of guilt and shame. He has a history of compulsive shopping, periods of increased motivation, suicidal attempts, hospitalizations, negative thinking, and he would like medication management, mental health services, and he would like to improve his lifestyle. Some background information: the client is a 31-year-old Caucasian male who's never been married and has no children. He currently lives in Sydney, Nebraska, and is not in a relationship at this time. His only close relationship is with his aging mother, and he and his mother live together. This relationship is reported as good. Client states that his mother is one of the main reasons that he is still alive today. Client has no relationships with any of his extended family. He is estranged from his biological father and has been since about the age of 12, when he and his mother discovered that his father was actively addicted to pornography, and he began to show interest in young girls. He does report that he has not been sexually abused, and he does not believe that his father was actively abusing anyone at the time. However, he does say that he's not for sure of that. Some background information continued. Client has a high school diploma. He currently works as a customer service specialist, an average of 22 hours per week. He does find this is difficult to maintain at this time due to the severity of his depressive symptoms. Despite the fact that he is finding it difficult, he does enjoy his work. Client has no history of drug or alcohol use. He reports having an initial diagnosis of anxiety in 2004 as a teen. His first hospitalization was in 2012 when he left a suicide note. His second hospitalization took place in 2014 after he attempted to slit his wrist. Since this time, he reports having persistent feelings of hopelessness and thoughts that things will never change or improve. Client reports that he most recently saw a therapist in Fort Collins, Colorado, and this was a good experience. He was on medication regimen that he felt was effective, and he would like to experience this again. Some behavioral observations: the client arrived a few minutes early for the session with his mother. He was dressed appropriately. Despite the fact that his hair was a bit disheveled and unwashed, he was unshaven, and his personal hygiene was lacking. He was oriented type 4, and he appeared to be in good cognitive standing based on the Fulstein MMSE, and he did score a 27. Client completed all the tasks that were asked. He was cooperative, non-resistant, and had no difficulty in establishing rapport. The main challenge that was observed was when he was asked about discussing any issues related to the biological father. He did show resistance and some avoidance in that manner. He had a previous diagnosis of bipolar disorder. However, the current episode is depressed, moderate, F31.32, previous diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder, client does have the collateral report to support evidence for this, as well as reports do indicate this in the information that was sent to the agency. However, in supporting the clinical diagnosis presented today in presentation, client shows evidence for 5 or more of the following symptoms of current depressed episode. Client shows a loss of interest and a depressed mood. He indicates feelings of hopelessness. Client reports weight loss without dieting. He reports fatigue, periods of psychomotor agitation, insomnia, and hypersomnia, guilt, shame, restlessness, and agitation. Client has had previous suicidal attempts, hospitalizations, and a depressed mood that far exceeds 2 weeks. The diagnosis continued. Part B of the depressed episode. This client is significantly impacted in all areas, socially, occupationally, and other areas of functioning. Part C states that the current episode cannot be attributed to the physiological effects of a substance or other medical conditions. The client has no other physical conditions, and he is not being exposed to the effects of a substance or the use of drugs or alcohol. Therefore, the client does meet the criteria for bipolar disorder current episode depressed moderate F31.32. Recommendations for the client. Client will resume mental health services at Panhandle Health Group based on research. The treatment method for a client with bipolar would need to include a number of treatment modes. This would not only involve the use of pharmacotherapy, but also be augmented with DBT, which then bring to light the need for life management skills. Also, as mentioned previously, short-term goals need to include some acute symptom control, suicide prevention, improve the client's overall quality of life, and, as mentioned previously, suicide prevention. I will note that a safety management plan was put in place, and client was given instructions as to what to do if he did become suicidal. Further treatment will need to include psychoeducation, CBT, DBT, improved med management, an increase in life satisfaction, improved sleep schedule, better exercise and diet, and an overall increase in social integration. This is an integral approach to bipolar, as overall there is a need to recognize that there is no one singular explanation for bipolar 1. The treatment plan, the problem mentioned by the client is to leave the house without my stomach being tied into knots. The client has developed a persistent pattern of depression and suicidal ideation at the current pattern. He has a history of bipolar and is currently experiencing avoidance of all social activities. This is restricted not only to his work schedule, which is becoming increasingly difficult for him to handle, but he is currently unmedicated and has been for almost a year. Client reports that at this point of almost not being able to function any longer and would like to get to a better place. The goal, the client will be able to leave the house without his stomach tying into knots. This will be effectuated by gaining an awareness of thoughts, feelings, and situations, as well as emotions that are triggering his depressive symptoms, and develop healthy ways to deal with the negative, uncomfortable emotions, thereby eliminating the need to avoid pleasurable activities that increase the depressive symptoms. The client will recognize this by going from a 5 on the SED scale to a 0 on the SED scale. Objectives. The client will increase his desire to engage in meaningful activities by identifying and processing 3 triggers such as core issues, beliefs, or schemas that lead to and perpetuate avoidant behaviors, and to discuss them 1 time per week during therapy until a total of 15 to 20 triggers have been identified and processed to reduce the number of times per week the client engages in avoidant behaviors from 3 to 4 times to 0 times per week. The intervention, the therapist will use CBT and DBT-informed techniques to help the client identify the underlying cognitive distortions that are the basis for the triggers, schemas, core beliefs that maintain the depression and confront them, as well as using psychoeducation. The theory is CBT. The objectives continue. The client will increase his ability to cope with uncomfortable feelings of anxiety and depression by identifying and processing two coping techniques that he will learn during session, an attempt during the week when he feels compelled to engage in avoidant behaviors or suicidal ideations, and discuss the effectiveness of these coping skills during the weekly therapy session until a total of 5 effective coping skills have been identified to help the client increase his ability to deal with feelings of depression. The intervention, therapist will use CBT and DBT informed techniques to help the client identify the underlying cognitive distortions that are the basis for the triggers, schemas, core beliefs that maintain the depression, and confront them, as well as using psychoeducation, the theory, CBT. The client, these are objectives continued. The client will increase his ability to counteract feelings of anxiety and improve self-regulation by learning a minimum of 5 healthy, appropriate self-regulating skills, which can be used during the week when he feels triggered at work or other times because of feelings of depression or suicidal ideation. He will report back to a mental health professional regarding effectiveness to increase his ability to manage feelings of anxiety and depression. Therapists will use CBT and DBT to help client identify cognitive distortions that are the basis for triggers that maintain the depression and confront them, as well as using psychoeducation. The theory is DBT. Intervention number 2. Therapists will use psychoeducation to teach the client to recognize symptoms of depression, as well as the biological components of bipolar, the need for medication compliance, also family education in order to help the client and his mother gain a greater understanding of the need for continued compliance in these areas and the consequences for non-compliance, as well as teach the client to recognize the ABCs of consequences, suppressive behaviors, antecedent behavior, and consequences in order to help the client determine the situations that elicit depressive behaviors. The theory is psychoeducation. Goal number 2. The client will replace negative thinking with the ability to accept himself and others, as well as develop and demonstrate effective coping skills and stabilize moods while eliminating suicidal ideation and returning to a previous level of stable behaviors with a life satisfaction rating of at least a 4 on the subscale of 0 to 5 on 5 out of 7 days of the week. Objective number 1. The client will increase his ability to deal with stress and anxiety by identifying and processing one life stressor each week, in which his weekly therapy session will help to identify the activating event, work the resulting behavior, such as yelling at the customer, and the consequence of that behavior. For example, being disciplined or fired, until a total of 10 life stressors have been identified and processed to help reduce the out-of-control feeling that lead to his depressive and anxious behaviors. Intervention number 1, the mental health professional will provide psychoeducation on the ABC framework of how an activating and precipitating event, stressor, leads to thoughts, feelings, actions, behaviors, targeted behavior, poor coping skills used at the time, and consequences to self, any additional precipitating events or additional targets. Objective number 2, the client will decrease his faulty thinking patterns by identifying and processing 3 negative distortions each week that are contributing to his faulty thinking patterns, and challenge these beliefs or distortions until a total of 10 cognitive distortions have been processed and challenged to reduce dysfunctional or irrational thinking. Intervention 2, the therapist will use CBT and DBT informed techniques to help the client improve personal and interpersonal skills, cognitive restructuring, and manage, reduce, and regulate maladaptive behaviors and thoughts and feelings of hopelessness, anger, and abandonment. Objective number 3, the client will increase his coping skills